ربنا آتنا من لدنك رحمة وهيئ لنا من أمرنا رشدا فضربنا على آذانهم في الكهف سنين عددا ثم بعثناهم لنعلم أي الحزبين أحصى لما لبثوا أمدا نحن نقص عليك نبأهم بالحق إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى وربطنا على قلوبهم إذ قاموا فقالوا ربنا رب السماوات والأرض لن ندعو من دونه إلها لقد قلنا إذا شططا هؤلاء قومنا اتخذوا من دونه آلهة لولا يأتون عليهم بسلطان بين فمن أظلم ممن افترى على الله كذبا وإذ اعتزلتموهم وما يعبدون إلا الله فأووا إلى الكهف ينشر لكم ربكم من رحمته ويهيئ لكم من أمركم مرفقا وترى الشمس إذا طلعت تزاور عن كهفهم ذات اليمين وإذا غربت تقرضهم ذات الشمال وهم في فجوة منه ذلك من آيات الله من يهد الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا وتحسبهم أيقاظا وهم رقود ونقلبهم ذات اليمين وذات الشمال وكلبهم باسط ذراعيه بالوصيد لو اطلعت عليهم لوليت منهم فرارا ولملئت منهم رعبا وكذلك بعثناهم ليتساءلوا بينهم قال قائل منهم كم لبثتم قالوا لبثنا يوما أو بعض يوم قالوا ربكم أعلم بما لبثتم فابعثوا أحدكم بورقكم هذه إلى المدينة فلينظر أيها أزكى طعاما فليأتكم برزق منه وليتلطف ولا يشعرن بكم أحدا إنهم إن يظهروا عليكم يرجموكم أو يعيدوكم في ملتهم ولن تفلحوا إذا أبدا وكذلك أعثرنا عليهم ليعلموا أن وعد الله حق وأن الساعة لا ريب فيها إذ يتنازعون بينهم أمرهم فقالوا ابنوا عليهم بنيانا ربهم أعلم بهم قال الذين غلبوا على أمرهم لنتخذن عليهم مسجدا سيقولون ثلاثة رابعهم كلبهم ويقولون خمسة سادسهم كلبهم رجما بالغيب ويقولون سبعة وثامنهم كلبهم قل ربي أعلم
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the side event titled Transforming Through Predictable, Accessible, and Demand-Based Climate Finance. This side event is being organized by the government of Belize in partnership with Taiwan Research Institute. some other collaborative partners. Climate finance, of course, being a very hot topic during the COP and even before the COP, everybody knows that. Most of the developing countries are fighting for access for climate finance because climate finance access, the demand-based access for climate finance will decide the success rate of all the prioritized climate action, not only by the developing country parties, but the entire world. So for the interest of time, let us start the day's proceedings. So I would like to invite Honorable Orlando Habet, the Minister for Sustainable Development, Climate Change, and Disaster Risk Management from Belize, to deliver the opening remarks of the event. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Moderator. Excellencies, dignitaries, friends from the Republic of China and Taiwan, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted and honored to be invited to deliver the opening remarks at this event hosted by the government of Belize in collaboration with Taiwan, the Taiwan Research Institute, ASEDI, ALG, and RTCC. No doubt that this COP is a significant one, as it has been tagged as an implementation COP. In other words, a COP of action. This is the 6th COP we are having after agreeing on the historic Paris Agreement. Today, we are trying to discuss an important and challenging aspect of implementing climate action, which is climate finance. We have been discussing the finance-related issues under the UNFCCC process over many years, but with limited success as far as the vulnerable developing countries are concerned. If I may highlight the case of Belize, we are highly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, especially with frequent and intensified extreme weather events. A few days ago, Belize was affected by Hurricane Lisa, and it is just a fraction of what we undergo as a developing country in the Caribbean, where we expend anywhere between 5 to 10% of annual budget on a yearly basis. Though we raise our voice for increased climate finance commitments and flows based on historical responsibilities, our efforts in climate action have always been ambitious. Belize was affected badly by an extended drought in 2018, affecting the lives and the livelihoods of a large portion of Belizeans. It also brought down our economic growth to a negative trajectory, which was later amplified by the pandemic. Amidst all the economic hardships, Belize updated the NDC targets with a higher ambition level, with broadening the coverage and the depth of its actions. We have estimated the total cost of implementation until 2030 as $1.9 billion US, out of which we have secured finances of approximately US $300 million. Belize has a daunting task of securing this broad gap in climate finance of $1.6 billion US. Moreover, this figure does not account for the potential incremental nature of climate change impacts, human and institutional capacity enhancement requirements, and others. Knowing that bridging of this financing gap is challenging, Belize has taken few additional steps forward to make ourselves prepared for implementing our ambitious climate change priorities. We have carried out a comprehensive climate finance landscape study for Belize with a detailed analysis of climate finance amounts, sources, instruments, sectors, etc., to identify our strengths, to identify our weaknesses, challenges, and opportunities in accessing climate finance. Based on the landscape assessment, we have developed climate finance strategy to guide our pathway to access climate finance in an integrated and in a strategic manner. We have strengthened our local institutional architecture and systems related to climate finance while strengthening partnerships with our development partners in building the local capacities. Additionally, out of the total climate investments, over 10% has been met with domestic public finance amidst all the economic challenges we face, while over 65% of climate investments are coming as loans. Under this circumstance, it is imperative that we have access to concessional international climate finance to implement our climate change priorities, especially the adaptation priorities. Our adaptation NDCs are mostly conditional actions, and we are facing a danger of loading our vulnerabilities with impacts of inaction. Predictable, concessional, and demand-based finance is key to achieve sustainable development and also of our survival. Though I highlighted the case of Belize, this is the common story of most of the vulnerable developing countries, especially the small countries. We do believe the ongoing COP27 will take long strides towards provision of finance. The discussion on long-term finance, new collective quantified goals are very important for us. Even the interesting discussions and the processes are happening outside the negotiating rooms as well, and we are aware of those. I am sure this event will also provide valuable ingredients to the overall process. We are expecting a synergistic overall outcome on finance here at Sharm el-Sheikh. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for setting the scene with your insightful opening remarks on climate finance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving into a panel discussion. We do have an eminent panel today here to share their views and experiences in terms of climate finance. So without taking much time, let me have the privilege of inviting Mr. Carlos Paul, the Director of the Climate Finance Unit, the Ministry of Economic Development and Investment from Belize, to talk about the challenges and opportunities in accessing climate finance. Floor is yours, Mr. Paul.
Thank you so much, moderator. Ladies, gentlemen, excellencies, good afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this event, transforming through predictable, accessible, and demand-based climate finance. Allow me to express my thanks for the invitation to be part of this very important side event and able to speak on the challenges and opportunities of accessing climate finance on behalf of the government of Belize and the Ministry of Economic Development. I will start by sharing information of the Integrated Climate Finance and Coordinating Unit, CFU for short, which was created on January 3rd, 2022, less than a year ago. Of note is that the Climate Finance Unit was created as a recommendation from the Climate Finance Strategy and, because of last year COP26. The government felt that it needed an institutional mechanism, a structure, and a dedicated unit to streamline the process of accessing climate finance while capitalizing on other synergies with other sustainable development priorities of Belize. The purpose of the unit is to maximize Belize's access to climate finance towards enhancing its overall resilience and sustainable development. The mandate of the Climate Finance Unit is to translate climate change adaptation, mitigation, preparedness, and resilience into plans, implementable and ready finance projects. We also act as the expert hub for climate finance in Belize. We update, we'll review and monitor climate finance strategy in Belize. We'll facilitate, support, and coordinate project development and proposal submission from government and all other stakeholders who will submit climate finance projects. We are the lead, we should lead Belize international climate finance advocacy and networking efforts. And we collaborate with the National Climate Change Office and the wider Ministry of Sustainable Development, Climate Change, and Disaster Risk Management. Since the inception of the unit became the operational focal point and served as the national designated authority for the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund. Belize, like how Minister has previously said, Belize is small, but is extremely vulnerable to climate change effects such as hurricanes, storms, flooding, severe drought, sea level rise, coastal erosion. Moreover, climate change is already impacting our coastal communities, where 49% of the population is concentrated. In addition, it is impacting the primary sectors such as tourism and agriculture, and in agriculture specifically, the sugar and the citrus industry. That contributes significantly to the national economy, including the generation of employment and food security. Our country ranks as the 61st country with the highest exposure to relatively mortality risk from multiple hazards in the world, and the 8th ranked country out of 167 for climate risk. Furthermore, Belize's annual average losses from weather during 1990 to 2020 equals to about close to 4% of the GDP per year. To address these vulnerabilities, climate finance is urgently needed. I will highlight some opportunities in accessing climate finance, but those are going hand in hand with the challenges too. Opportunity 1, climate financing mechanisms. Over the years, we have seen different mechanisms that have been emerging and evolved to provide financing, including operating entities as the UNFCCC and others. This interest is encouraging, and we see an opportunity even though there are concerns of the adequacy. Debt for climate swap, or debt for nature swaps, I could refer as well, is an instrument for public debt management that is combined with components of climate actions. In the case of Belize, the blue bond transaction, the debt for marine conservation, reduced external debt burden by 12%, and the debt to GDP by 25%, and has allocated roughly about $190 for marine conservation. I will talk more on the debt and climate finance nexus under the challenges. The third opportunity, funding earmarked for climate priorities. It reduces the burden for the government to spend on climate projects. Climate finance is earmarked for priorities outlined in the government's medium-term development strategy, in the recently updated National Determined Contribution Report and Implementation Plan, and other national and sectoral strategies and action plan. Now focusing on the challenges. concessionality of financing. Concessional financing is imperative for small and vulnerable developing countries like Belize. We are not economically strong. While we face the adverse effects of climate change caused by the historical actions of economically developed countries. So we urgently need concessional finance to implement climate finance actions in our countries. But this is still remain a big overall challenge for us globally, as it has been agreed for the pledge of US 100 billion target is yet to be fulfilled. Second challenge, high debt, limited resources, and competing priorities. We all know the fears on the global recession and looming over us. Most of the small developing countries, especially OASIS members like Belize, are now affected by high public debt. Our sovereign ratio has surpassed 100% of GDP after the pandemic, making it highly unsustainable. Unsustainable debt always squeezes the fiscal space, which is mandatory for effective climate actions. Competing priorities in sustainable development in our countries will become even challenging with debt crisis. Third challenge, long time frames for accessing finances. We all know that there are different financing sources for climate finance, especially the funds under the UNFCCC finance mechanism, which includes the Green Climate Fund. Unfortunately, the time required for accessing climate finance from this mechanism is unprecedented high. For a GCF project proposal development, sometimes it takes a bit more than 3 years. This is highly unacceptable and non-practical, as sometimes the ground realities may have completely changed by the time the actual finance is disbursed. This may even potentially make the project redundant. The delayed access of financing through existing mechanisms make it extremely challenging for countries such as Belize. To end, I want to give thanks to all the partners and donors who have provided climate financing to Belize. This has helped. However, there's a financing gap to implement the NDC's targets, which is over 1.6 billion, as has been mentioned by the Minister. The level of achievements of climate actions are therefore highly contingent to climate finance ambitious. But Belize has the drive and the political will to achieve our sustainable development ambitions, but we cannot do it alone. Public sector investment, strategic partners, and accessible climate finance is most needed and essential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paul, for that analysis on the opportunities as well as challenges we face as developing nations, especially small countries, island nations, in accessing climate finance. So now I have the privilege of inviting the second panelist in our side event, is Ms. Rose W. Yen, the advisor and the Associate Research Fellow of the Taiwan Research Institute, and she will be providing an overview of climate finance mechanisms, the convention, the multilateral and bilateral, and the Taiwanese contributions toward this. Madam Yen, over to you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to brief you about the status of climate finance within the current mechanisms and I will talk about the challenges and opportunities to scale up the level of climate finance and principles to make it predictable, accessible, and demand-driven. So first of all, we can see that climate action is attracting more and more investment. However, it is mainly driven by the deployment of mature technologies such as solar power and electric vehicles in the latest decade. When we further look into the source and destination of climate finance, we can find that almost 75% of the climate finance was concentrated in higher developed areas, including North America, Western Europe, and East Asia. Besides, 76% of all climate finance flows were raised and spent domestically. It indicates and results in the fact that regions where the majority of low and middle income countries are located receive a relatively small share of the climate finance, despite the fact that they are the most vulnerable groups in the world. So both mitigation and adaptation are facing gaps between current level and the estimated needs of climate finance. Global climate finance needs to be increased by at least fivefold by 2030. The gap in climate finance seems pretty large. However, when we put this problem in the context of global economic development, the funding gap represents less than 5% of global GDP. So the cumulative fossil fuel subsidies operated in 51 major countries alone were 40% higher than the cumulative climate investment in the last decade. And in the same time, private sector holds approximately 410 trillion in assets. So if we can imagine that when we shift only 1.4% of them will be sufficient to fill the climate finance gap. So undoubtedly, there are huge potentials waiting to be unleashed in both public and private financial systems. Hence, we would like to ask why the money aren't able to be directed to those climate actions in a timely and just method. So under the current structure of global climate finance, channels of international delivery of funds account only 14% of the flows. It is not an easy task to expand these channels. They even fail the 100 billion goal every year since 2009. So it is essential to know how we can leverage what we got to catalyze climate finance from the other sources as much as we can. So these channels of international climate finance can be structured into at least 4 layers: contributors, recipients, and there are many bilateral and multilateral actors deeply engaged. Those mediators play a crucial role in transferring funds from the contributors to the recipients. The Green Climate Fund is a relatively innovative tool to fulfill its missions, such as valuing the engagement of the private sector. There are formal ways for NGOs to participate in the supervision of climate projects and opportunities for co-financing. According to the Sharm El-Sheikh Guidebook for Just Financing published just during COP27, challenges faced by climate projects are identified, most of them related to the risks of those projects in need, which jeopardize the predictability, accessibility, and demand-driven of climate finance. So to manage the risks, here are some policy tools we can use. First of all, it is crucial to help developing countries create an enabling environment for climate investment, such as transparency and accountability in climate finance. Climate monitoring systems and related climate services should be introduced. Secondly, we have to make climate projects bankable with innovative financial solutions as much as possible, such as blended finance, insurance, resilience credits. And there are also a lot of innovative financial models identified in the Sharm el-Sheikh Guidebook for Just Financing. Last but not least, inclusive governance is crucial. For the full implementation of the previous two policy tools, it is important to have platforms that bring together all the actors in the formulation of policies, and multi-stakeholder dialogue process and grievance mechanisms, and standards of corporate social responsibility or advanced responsible business conduct to ensure a just transition. In order to help developing countries to apply these tools to acquire climate finance, transfer of capacity building and technology are essential. This picture shows the roles of key stakeholders in strengthening and enabling environment for climate finance in different stages of climate actions. It's impossible to act alone to make the systematical transformation. Cooperation among all actors is required. So in conclusion, to conquer the barriers and catalyze enough climate actions to achieve the net zero emission targets and adapt to climate changes, it is necessary to unlock the greatest potential of every climate actor. So take Taiwan, for example. It has already built strong partnership with some least developed countries and small island developing states by launching climate projects in these areas, such as the establishment of climate monitoring and early warning systems or foreign management in collaboration with local networks. After committing the 2050 net zero targets, Taiwan is expected to develop key net zero technologies such as hydrogen power, CCUS, electric vehicles, and so on. And with its technology endowment in information technology, machinery, and chemical industries, and of course the huge finance potential. According to the latest Allianz Global Wealth Report, Taiwan ranks the 5th richest economy according to its assets per capita. However, these potentials have not been fully directed to global climate actions. With the emerging new global arrangements coping for climate change, it is important to be designed an open mechanism to all actors around the world, and every actor should not be excluded from the transformation due to their age, gender, or identity when facing the urgent agenda of coping with climate change in a just manner. So here is my report. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rose, for providing that overview on the climate finance mechanisms available and the contribution by Taiwanese. Now I would like to take the privilege of inviting Ms. Seng Yung Ching, the Director of the Research, Development and Evaluation Department of the International Cooperation and Development Fund of Taiwan, to talk about access to climate finance and capacity strengthening and knowledge sharing. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. And I thank you for Minister Williams here with us. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Yun Qin Zheng from International Cooperation Development Fund. It's truly my honor to be here with this excellent event. Please allow me to give you an overview of TaiwanICDF and how we are helping SIDS to assess climate finance through capacity strengthening and knowledge transfer. For those who are new to us, the TaiwanICDF is Taiwan's solo official aid agency, and we play a key role in Taiwan's official development aid. We currently have 80 ongoing projects in 36 countries with 22 technical missions and around 250 professionals in the field. Given Taiwan's own journey from a developing nation to one of the world's economic powerhouse, our strategy draws on Taiwan's comparative strategies as we respond to our partner countries' needs and international development goals by integrating public and private resources and strengthening cooperative relations through bilateral and multilateral means. We all know that climate change is a complex issue with its effect is global. Since climate change creates a challenge that is environmental, social, and economical, our solution must be multidimensional. Here are our 6 priority sustainable aid focusing on agriculture, ICT, public health, and medicine, education, environment, and SME development. Since 2015, we have aligned our organization strategy plan with UN Sustainable Development Goals, and our approach and priorities are driven by the key challenges faced by our partner countries, including food security for agriculture, ICT-based public service for better governance, climate resilience for environment, maternal health and NCD in public health, higher education, vocational training, capacity building for education, and entrepreneurship, economic development, and global partnership for SME development. Let me now focus on the key challenges based on our experience that facing by SIDS. While SIDS contribute to less than 1% of global carbon emission, they are getting 100% of the climate change impact. SIDS are losing their habitat, lower food security, increasing living costs, and lower quality of life. Because of SIDS geolocation and population size, they are very vulnerable to external shock. Be it natural disaster like hurricane, which Honorable Minister was mentioned, and also COVID-19 pandemic or man-made disaster that cause logistic delays. Because of their limited resources, SIDS urgently need access to external financial support and capacity to help their own recovery, and also to build resilience in between their social, economic, and natural system against a future shock. However, the current systems are not designed for SIDS. In short, we found that the 2 biggest and long-standing challenges for SIDS to access to climate financing are not having enough skilled human resources and technical capacity throughout the project cycle. And also the second, limited data for adaptation project, high transition costs and small project size make it more difficult for SIDS to attract investment and compete for access to climate resilient financing. So even after Samoa Pathway was signed 20 years ago, the current climate and development financing system, lack of harmonization system, still fail to address its unique needs, and it's all resulting in fewer funding for SIDS. However, TaiwanICDF recognizes the challenges faced by SIDS, and we fully support and recognize SIDS as special cases. That is why, unlike many donors have pulled back on their contributions during the pandemic, TaiwanICDF increased our ODA by 156 million for over the following 6 years and have successfully implemented multiple sustainable development projects in our partner countries, of course, includes these countries. Following are some of the projects that we have successfully completed in SEEDS. These are our approach we take at TaiwanICDF as we help our partner countries' agencies to achieve social and economic development. One of our key differences is instead of drop shipment, we have permanent technical missions in the field that are closer to the ground to provide technical assistance, to understand the requirements, and to implement solutions together with the local agencies. And to help to address the capacity challenges faced by SEEDS, we provide higher education scholarship, TVET, professional workshops for education and training. In addition to humanitarian assistance for post-disaster recovery, we use our own loan and investment to provide financial support to focus on the vulnerable population and gender equality. In support of SEED's fight against developing challenges, we have aligned our 6 priority solutions area with the Samoa pathway. Here are some examples. In agriculture, we have 15 projects in 11 SEEDS countries. We are promoting the sustainable agricultural consumption and production in food crop, and also aquaculture and livestock. We're targeting food security and production in food crop. And we hope with the food security and nutrition by providing advanced technology and capacity to building for the locals. As for public health and medicine, we have 4 projects in 4 SEEDS countries. We are focusing on NCD and emergency response. As for education, TaiwanICDF has 6 projects in 11 SEEDS countries, which offer higher education, scholarship, professional workshop, remote education, vocational training, healthcare personnel training, and a lot more, while we are all ensuring gender equality and also women empowerment. One of our key ICT success is the Intelligent Birth Management and Monitoring System project that we use a smart monitoring and dynamic information system to improve the public transportation efficiency. And as for climate change and waste management, we have 8 projects in 5 SEEDS countries that focus on the natural disaster management, early warning system, waste management, and plastic recycling and renewable energy. Lastly, sustainable, inclusive, and equitable economic growth with a decent work for all. We have 4 projects in 3 SEEDS countries that aim at youth and women empowerment and SME development. As you may know, in 2020, Honorable Government of Belize and the chair of AOSIS wrote to the UN Secretary General again, stating the need to advance the multidimensional voluntary index. And after that, the SDSN developed it by measuring a 3-pillar framework with 18 indicators covering economic vulnerabilities, structural development vulnerabilities, and exposure of climate risk and natural disaster. However, only countries have data for at least 70% of variables are included to calculate the MVI score. In total, I think 12 countries do not meet the cutoff. To help SEEDS further, TaiwanICDF adopt the Climate and Ocean Risk Vulnerability Index, in short is COVID, not COVID, developed by the Stimson Center, which is a top 10 think tank in the United States. And like the MVI, the COVID integrates economic, political, environmental data to produce a holistic assessment to determine how resilient a coastal city is to climate and ocean risk. However, COVID has 3 types of risk, 10 risk categories, and up to 100 indicators to measure the risk. To address the gap of data in seats, COVID used a survey, experts interviews, and a weighting mechanism to quantify the missing data. COVID collects regional, national, and city level data to provide a macro view with input from the government, private sector, academic, and civil society. Additionally, it also examines the data changes over time and project future trends, thereby contributing to UN level index by bridging the data gap and widen the level of scope of data to provide a more holistic view on vulnerability of target locations. To conclude, I believe that the key to sustainable development is to be inclusive and to help those who need to help themselves. So it is ironic that those who cause the least harm have to bear the most punishment from the climate change, and those who need the most help are excluded from the financial system set up by those who have the most. Things must change for a better and be inclusive to bridge the gap for seats. Even as a relative smaller ODA, we believe TaiwanICDF have been able to achieve quite a bit in helping our partner countries to improve their national cross-sector resilience. Imagine what can we do, what can we achieve if we work even more together. Thank you for listening, and hope you all enjoying the rest of COP27.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yunchin, for that, the presentation on capacity building and knowledge sharing. Now we are going to hear about the importance of the governance aspects in managing climate finance. So to talk about the governance lessons from the Latin America, the enabling access to climate-based financing, I would like to invite the Maria Rolim, the institutional partner of firm Rolim, Yoti Gaulat Cardoso Advogados, if I'm not mistaken. Over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here and with all of you and my distinguished colleagues from the table. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the governance and the importance of the governance in Latin America, and also to give an overview of what we think should be done to go forward and to make the finance more available to everyone. That's the proposal here. Well, some of the things I have here, my colleagues already had presented, so I'm going to skip some of the slides, just not to tire you too much. Well, when we are talking about climate finance, we are talking about many sources of and alternatives to have finance. So we don't need to focus on just one source. That's what I want to mean. And there are some pillars that are relevant and important to have a fair system of finance. Governance, the idea of risk management, the monitoring, and to have data, metrics, and transparency. We have to work in all of them to have them together and organize to make the finance more available and more easy for everyone that needs to access, because as you know, developing countries have much more difficult to access the finance than the other countries, so we need something proper to address these difficulties. I think we already see that what has been done, it seems to increase and it seems to be doing quite well, but not that much. We need to do a lot more, and that's the question. Just to looking at a bit with detail, a little more in detail, we have 51% coming from the public sector of all the loans and the $62 billion that has been done, and 49% come from the private sector. But if you look closer, you can see that the private sector has increased a little bit more than the public sector. So I think we have much space to improve the private sector participation in this thing. As my colleague already showed you, the tracked investment flow is mostly raised domestically and also applied domestically. So we need also to improve this cross-border interaction between countries having or facing the same problems, and they could join and access more investment for all. Here is just the distribution, regional distribution of climate finance. As you can see, most of them stays in the developed countries on the Asia. So the center of this map and the south of this map need to have more access to it. And what needs to be done shows that's in blue, this part in blue is exactly what has been done. And the huge Sinai Mount that we have to go up to Everest, I would say, to fill in what we have to do and what we still need to be done. It has to be improved around 90% of what we've done so far. When you go to finance for developing countries, you also can see that most of them comes from the multilateral public and the bilateral public, public authorities. So we have many other actors that could work more in this space. Another thing that we need to address is where it's going. And most of it goes to mitigation, but we already have to deal with adaptation, because adaptation now is as crucial as mitigating. We need to do both together. We cannot just stay looking just on mitigation. Of course, it is ambition, it is important, but adaptation now is a reality, and we have to adapt some change that will not change, as we just saw presented about the states that have the coast and are under threat of floods and things like that. Going a little bit more for Brazil, where I came from and where I live, it is the structure in Brazil follows one flux of governance to look at, but I would like to highlight the space and the importance of this step 4, where you have the facilitators of the projects. It is an an option to have them, but it is really important to have someone in the middle to facilitate the projects and the access to finance, but someone that can not only to monitor and to chat and to how can I say, to go to the project to see if everything is fine, but to help them to make it happen. That's the thing. We need to build capacity. Some of the countries, they just don't have the resources available to deal with the project. So that's important to have someone able to do that. And sometimes the financial institutions are not exactly the ones that are prepared for that, but some of them might be important. For instance, the public sector, the public development banks have a crucial role that they could play here, special to policy integration between sustainable development and climate action, because they are in both sides, they are working with both, and they have a lot of experience in this area. And also the redirect finance flows toward carbon and and climate resilience, and also catalyze other and bring private sector in. They have this potential to de-risk or ease the risk for innovation and projects, new projects that we need so much. Talking about Brazil again, Brazil has a climate finance main regulation. It's not enough, but we have a National Treasury Council which working on the charging compliance with environmental issues. The National Climate Change Policy as well, which we put at 2009, we established in 2009, and you have the Climate Change Fund. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the funds which are important for us to discuss a new decision from our Supreme Court that might help to deal with the investment. We have national funds as a climate finance mechanism. We have multilateral agents and funds, and we also have the UNFCCC funds as everyone. And the national funds are really important to domestically organize this process for everyone, and in Brazil it's really very important to have them working. I'm going to give a look at the funds. We have this one that is the National Climate Change Fund. It has invested already $11.4 million in 2020. It is directed operations by BNDES, which is our development bank. And also we have the National Environmental Fund. It has resource from the fines and has this idea of direct for environmental issues in Latin America in general, in Brazil in particular. And then we have this one, which I want to talk a little bit more, which is the Amazonia Fund. The Amazonia Fund is supported by, was to some extent and is supported by Norway and Germany, and Petrobras just a little bit. As you can see, Petrobras just 0.5%, but most of it comes from Germany and Norway, which is good, but causes a kind of dependency of two countries. At that same point, we end up not having the resource applied properly. So another thing that we need to think about is how to diversify the countries and the donors for this kind of fund, and then to have reduced the risk of end up without resource. And it is and was a quite effective fund. It completed 103 projects, but the good thing is because they didn't just give the money, they follow all the projects in local space. They have someone there to help the people doing the projects. But from 2019, it was not applying the resource. It was brought before our Supreme Court, and the lawsuit recently decided that the Paris Agreement has a status of human rights treaty, and because of the environment being so important to take care, so the government could not back not applying the funding. It should look for more funding and to apply. It will be very good to Brazil to have this status to the Paris Agreement, because it shorten a lot of work, legal work to be done in Brazil. So it will have this supranational status, which means that it has a constitutional value as any other provisions, which helps a lot and exposes the country for climate litigation, which might be strategical to get it done. And what is needed now, I'm almost in the end, what is needed to enable access to climate finance in general? Transparency, governance, taxonomy for sustainable development, and capacitation or improve capacity building. Let's see a little bit, that's my last slide, and I'll leave some of the points for us to discuss and to think about. Investment in innovation is really important, but it is high risk because it is innovation. Some of the companies are not well established already. So we need to explore new structures of financing to address this high risk, because we need to invest in this to do the transition, but they are innovation. So risk management need to change the vision to short, medium, and long-term vision. We cannot, because we need to, banks and the finance system is environmental compliance, but on the other hand, the companies are going, the projects are going to have the finance to meet the environmental compliance and other things. So it's kind of a hand and egg situation that we have to deal and escalate maybe this view, this long-term view of risk from the financial system. We also need to work on complementary mechanisms to increase project bankability. My colleague Rodrigo will talk a little bit more of that, but I would say that risk-sharing mechanism, blended finance, would be really important to have, and other mechanisms that we have to de-risk the operation. And more than just monitoring, we need to invest in capacitation to help the projects. Data, as we saw, we had this presentation, is really important to have information because information reduces the risk. Taxonomy or some kind of standards to reduce also the burden, the administrative burden, and to improve national structures and governance, because that's at the end of the day that we need. It is a environmental friendly, a friendly environment for investment. That's what we need to do. So I would finish saying that we need resource, transparency, compliance, data, but we really need to bring everyone to this discussion and to provide improved capacity to invest. So otherwise it's a waste of money, and we also need the financial system to change its mind, to understand that they need to have new standards, a new way of looking at investment. It's not just the traditional way of doing business. Thank you so much for your time and patience.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rolim, to highlighting about the governance aspects in accessing the climate finance. So we are moving to the last but not least, the panel intervention today. We are going to focus about the legal aspects. Regulations and laws to accelerate speed of climate finance in Latin America. For that, to do that intervention, I kindly invite Mr. Rodrigo Sluminski, the partnership lead of Latin American Climate Lawyers Initiative for mobilizing actions. So over to you, Mr. Rodrigo.
Thank you, fellows. Thank you for the previous panelists. Thank you again, the government of Belize, for organizing this such important panel. I've been catching up with the meeting rooms related to financial issues. I think I have some remarks to do here in terms of what were you speaking in the previous presentation also. I've been working 20 years in this agenda, especially with the agenda of financing project mitigation issues, but also I'm trying to catch up the adaptation as well. So I think it will be very precious to discuss after my presentation how can we move forward in this agenda. Of course, everyone is asking where's the money, and you already know by heart this graph. What I want to highlight is that it seems that we are going nowhere in terms of ambition. If we look to the pace of this graph, we almost have a kind of steady increase, which means nothing in terms of needs, need of climate finance, mostly now in terms of adaptation. I don't know if you're sure, but in this COP, we have 8 agendas in the meeting rooms related to climate finance. So we can find the standing committee, we can find the financial mechanism, Green Climate Fund, a Global Environmental Facility, the Adaptation Fund, and also the long-term financing, this 100 billion target. But also from Glasgow, we can find the new collectives quantify goal, and finally today, we are looking for a specific financial issue which is loss and damage. So how can we lean forward with this amount of subjects to look for? It's kind of hard to do. If we look to the global projected GDP, it is also an important information. In the meeting rooms, everyone is asking OECD for more transparency into the reports. These reports came from IMF. The thing here is that we are about $104 trillion of GDP, and something like 26 comes from the OECD, and if you compare to the climate financing approach, if I am correct, I'm a lawyer, so sorry, this is something like 0.014% of the investment, which is almost nothing. So how can we say there is ambition if the numbers don't show this ambition? And this is why I got this remarkable quotation into the meeting rooms, and the first one, I don't know if you heard this, it came from John Kerry in the first high-level meeting in terms of finance. Today we're going to have 3 o'clock the fifth, but actually the second here, high-level meeting, and he expressly said that no government has the money itself, which is correct. I agree with him, but the problem is that, so if the government doesn't really have the money, who does have? How we're going to do it? And from the negotiators, the co-facilitators and the facilitators, I've heard some different story. One of it shows that the world is based on trust, not disillusion. And the matter here is that how can we trust again within a process that we just didn't fulfill in terms of the long-term financial goal? And finally, if money is not a problem, what is the problem? And the problem, they said, that there are not enough good projects. And this is what I'm trying to take a look with you. First of all, in terms of mitigation, if you look after the reports that have been released in this special matter, and of course mitigation reports have quite older times due to the newer agenda of adaptation, we can find from the work group some remarkable approach and needs to dispatch this kind of projects. The first one, of course, is the risk of completion. And this is quite normal, not only because of climate finance, but any project finance or green bonds needs the completion. The operational risks, force majeure, it is a legal issue. And this is one I would like to highlight, the political and regulatory risks that can be the one that should be overcome here in the COP. The needs of the government approach in trying to overcome major risks, and of course environmental and social risks, currency exchange risk, and finally the interest rate risks. And these two last one, I would like to highlight mostly to South America, but I think it applies also to Central America. I don't know how far you can understand this graph, but I'd like to highlight in this graph where we are stated and how we can move forward. This is the benchmark interest rate in Latin America, which means the rates that the investors are able to receive considering the benchmark they have. So they prefer investing in the American Treasury due to the low risks than having like such a nice return in South America or in Latin America. And take a look and the way we are today, if we willing to have an investment in Argentina, the investor should have received 80% a year. How can this happen? How can we dispatch this agenda if we're talking about those higher returns? But there is an answer that we cannot see in this graph. If you look at the long term, if you look at the 20 years approach, we can see kind of an equilibrium of a rate. So this should be the agenda that government might have been talking about in this COP and of course in the meeting rooms. Looking after the bankability of the adaptation project, which is quite new, and we know it is not like so fancy approach due to lower returns. CPI has done like an incredible job summing up these bankability barriers, and one of them, of course, is the lack of investable projects, which means that there is projects available, but they are just not bankable. And that's why we have MDBs. That's why we have blended finance. That's why we have grants. So it should be very much important to highlight to the meeting rooms and also not only to the adaptation agenda, but also to the loss and damage agenda, this important role of adaptation projects in terms of investable projects. Adaptation projects are not easy to secure. That's why we need internal and national development banks. Here we can find out the compliance program, and this problem comes also with the matter of not having the information, the necessary information, the gap of technology, and all these issues that we already know. The complexity of due diligence. I don't know if you have worked with this kind of projects, not only adaptation, but also mitigation projects. The due diligence seems to be one of the darkest gap we should overcome, mostly because the barrier, the investment banks, and also the MDBs turn into when they request something of this kind of information from the project. This information of high costs, this is not a high cost of the interest. This is high cost to start talking about investment within this project. This is a common problem. For instance, if you start to talk with IMF, I don't know if you know, but if you start to talk with them to invest in the project, it is $150,000 just to talk to them and to receive a term sheet. Is this affordable? Is this affordable? I believe not. So the agenda here in the COP also could release this gap. And finally, we can find also the same currency and interest risk that I've talked about in terms of mitigation. If you look after the report of OECD, the same report that was just released that show us the slow pace of the ambition in terms of climate finance, we can also find out the same problems. And the most important problem that we can highlight here is that the investor still needs the return. So this is just about a risk and return problem. This is why the government should overcome any gap in terms of de-risking the problem and also to facilitating the process of investment, guaranteeing the return, actually at least a just return, an equal return to the investor. And to sum up, what should we do to enhance banking capacity on climate matter? And these were in the meeting rooms the last week. First of all, we need to increase the concessionary funds to enhance private sector with grants, blended finance, and of course other innovative instruments. We shall promote the risking process and procedures with insurance companies, with governments, and so on. We should also transfer or simply write off well-known barriers if we already know it is a gap, and this gap shall not easily be overcome. And so why not we just stop addressing it and use the power of the governments, the power of UNFCCC to release this barrier from avoiding the investment in the project. And fourth, catalyzing the resources to enhance private sectors, of course, as John Kerry just said. No government has the money, so we should rely on the private sector, of course. And finally, the last two ones, we need to create innovative but different innovative way how to think the financing of projects. This is not only about green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds. This is calling every stakeholders to the agenda. If we talk about a national government, we need to call everyone to talk about taxonomy, to talk about compliance, to talk about how do we release this agenda and how do we overcome the gaps that we already know. And finally, and this is, I know, it's important to Brazil, it's important to Argentina, Belize, and all the global south. How do we rebuild national capacity when we are still paying the debt of longer indebtedness that we just cannot be released from? So we need the MDBs, the developed countries, and UNFCCC to help enhance the rebuild of our national capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rodrigo. Let's give a round of applause for the wonderful panel, for their in-depth ideas and contributions to the discussion. So, in interest of time, we have very few minutes. If anybody has any burning questions or would like to contribute to discussions, I would like to open the floor for a couple of minutes, and after that we can. Okay, we have a raised hand there, too. So can we have a mic, please, for the gentleman over there, if you don't mind? Yes.
Good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to first acknowledge and appreciate the wonderful presentations by the various panelists is so remarkable. My name is Landing B. Sane. I come from the Gambia. I'm a mayor and also president of the mayors of the Gambia. Having listened to the various presentations, from the background of local governance, I am a bit particular as to what is in place that the local government authorities who ultimately also operate from the grassroots and probably are the custodians of most the people and their development, as well directly feel the brunt of climate change as it affects the people at the level of grassroots. I am not seeing, I didn't hear very well, particularly in the strategies that will emerge from the presentations or the actions. Maybe the local government authorities will be involved. But as a local government authority, it is my position that we look at how we integrate the involvement and participation of local government authorities in all our approaches. Because there and then, it is my belief that it will be more sustainable, and then the impact of our interventions will be much more felt, as there will be mechanisms that will sustain our interventions even after we exit. In this, I am referring to projects. Because there and then the local government authorities are the actors on the ground, and then they will sustain the gains of our interventions. As a local government authorities as well, I want to express also the impact of climate change. I am linking this to climate financing because I am seeing a lot of mechanism being involved, and sometimes the bureaucracy and even the procedures will tend to eliminate or create some obstacles, challenges for other parties to access financing. When the impact of climate change is seriously affecting those parties, let's say, for example, the local government authorities. In my area that I come from, that I had, we've seen a lot of young people migrating, risking their lives in the rivers to Europe, to the Americas, and that is serious. And that doesn't affect my area alone or my country alone, but the destinations that they are going in Europe, Italy, Spain, UK, and France, and others. This is pressure because some of those young people do not go with any skills. And they go and inundate the streets of Europe on skill, and you see the trickle effect that can create, not only on the countries of origin, but even to the countries of the other destination. But what causes this is because my country or my area that I come from predominantly rely on agriculture. And now, because of the impact of climate change, there is very serious decrease or erratic rainfall pattern. And therefore, production levels have drastically reduced. And there is very little chance for employment in terms of agriculture, which is the major source of employment and sustenance. So what is the hope now? And it's pushing these young people to go out for migration, for greener pastures, so-called greener pastures. Okay? But it doesn't stop there. Food insecurity, disaster-prone, vulnerability, and others. So I am presenting all this because the need is there. So climate financing should be looked into very seriously, and the challenges and the conditionalities should also be flexible enough for parties that are affected to access finance, not later, but now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor. We have another small question from here. And unfortunately, we might not be able to take any other questions after this, so we'll take it as the final comment of the question.
I will be very quick. My name is Malvina Berzak. I'm working at EY Center for Climate Policy. And I know that Belize is right now considering and preparing to build a robust voluntary carbon market in the country. And I would be very interested to hear what's the governance vision for this voluntary carbon market? What goals this VCM should achieve in Belize to help mitigation adaptation, I believe. So yeah, this is my question.
Currently, Belize is still in the process of developing its carbon legislation, and so we don't have anything finite as yet, but we're considering both forest and marine for blue carbon as it is, but certainly looking at what we have right now from pre-2020 and then looking forward for after 2020. But certainly, the whole gist of it is to see in prior, when we were looking at the legislation initially, one of the concerns that came up was the sharing of proceeds, because we have the private sector, you have indigenous communities. So all that is trying to be, we're trying to encompass that while we look at the legislation, and then a decision will be made on what will be available for us to have on the market. And, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for that comment. With that, I think it's my responsibility to thank all the panel and the participants. Just to sum up the discussions we had so far, we have been discussing few key issues. It's about the predictable finance, accessible finance, and demand-based finance. It's quite crucial aspects in terms of climate change and climate action are concerned. And if we look through the discussions, the minister started with showing what are the demands, what are the needs at the ground level from the country, which was endorsed later by one of the mayors from Ghana as well. And then we realized through the discussions, it's not just only money that we are talking about. It's not just only finance. It's a process. It ends as not only the quantity, it's about the quality, it's about the adequacy, it's about the capacities, it's about the transparency, and it's about governance and the legal aspects. So many aspects are coming into this process. So we have been discussing this, and I think our knowledge curve is going up. That's quite important. I think all these discussions are contributing a global action towards mobilizing more finance, and that transformative process need to fall through that. So thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Ladies and gentlemen in the panel, let's give another round of applause. And thank you very much, everybody, on behalf of the Government of Belize, as well as all the other contributing partners to organizing the events, taking your time, coming here, and contributing to the discussion. Thank you very much.
صالحا ولا يشرك بعبادة ربه أحدا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي أنزل على عبده الكتاب ولم يجعل له عوجا قيما لينذر بأسا شديدا من لدنه ويبشر المؤمنين الذين يعملون الصالحات أن لهم أجرا حسنا ماكثين فيه أبدا وينذر الذين قالوا اتخذ الله ولدا ما لهم به من علم ولا لآبائهم كبرت كلمة تخرج من أفواههم إن يقولون إلا كذبا فلعلك باخع نفسك على آثارهم إن لم يؤمنوا بهذا الحديث أسفا إنا جعلنا ما على الأرض زينة لها لنبلوهم أيهم أحسن عملا وإنا لجاعلون ما عليها صعيدا جرزا أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا